I want to continue our discussion of this absolutely wild and crazy hearing that has been taking place today. We talked about how Marjorie Taylor Greene factored into this and her crazy attacks against Dr. Anthony Fauci. Now I want to look at Jim Jordan. Again, the context is, I said in this other segment, I'll try not to re-explain too many of the things, but to me, this stinks of them trying to go back to their greatest hits and find another distraction now that one of their favorites, the Biden impeachment nonsense, has crumbled. So there's this attempt to attack Fauci to, again, get that back in the headlines to distract from their own failures and Trump now being a convicted felon. And so that's what this seems like it is to me. And Dr. Fauci did a fantastic job of defending all these attacks. And in this case, Aaron Rupar responds to the clips you're about to watch saying Fauci's now trolling Jim Jordan. So a little mockery even going on. You'll love to see it. Here's the first clip.
Do you agree that there was a push to downplay the lab leak theory?
Not on my part.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
Wow.
I think most of the country would find that amazing. I still got 11 seconds.
But look at the facts. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
All right, I yield back.
Right. So not really being able to defend himself after Fauci responded there. And as I said in the other segment, this whole conversation on a lot of these different elements of the COVID-19 pandemic discussion, MAGA doesn't seem to be able to get its head around, its collective head, the fact that this is how science works. Our understanding of things change. And we want from our experts for them to give us the best assessment based on the facts at that moment in time. And then in the case of, as another hair is attacking me, in the case of the origins of, every time I say that, I think of Trump trying to say origins and saying oranges. When it comes to how and where the COVID-19 pandemic started, we've also developed an understanding of that. And President Joe Biden, their number one antagonist within MAGA, actually is one of the people who, right when he got into office, directed an investigation and a report to be done. And that's what yielded some of the extra information that now leads us to not really the conclusion, but the prevailing wisdom, which is it could have been either. It could have been animal to human or lab. And if lab, accidental is the prevailing wisdom. And it's important to point that out because a lot of people have these dangerous theories about it was a bioweapon, it was engineered to be unleashed, and Fauci purposefully was helping to do that so that X, Y, or Z could happen that I don't really understand. And so they point to developed understanding and the facts sort of changing and more just facts being brought to surface as proof of earlier dishonesty, which is just not accurate whatsoever. And did some people out there maybe too aggressively state that never could it possibly be that it came from? Maybe. But I've witnessed Dr. Fauci speaking on the subject, and thoughtful public health officials and experts are in the habit of speaking as follows. We don't yet have evidence of such a thing. There's no reason to believe based on the evidence that we have now, but always open to in the future evidence could be brought forward of something. And it's irritating to watch this huge, based on a bunch of different factors in this conversation, this huge attack on just expertise in general and the undermining of these public health officials because it has horrible, horrible repercussions, as we'll get to after watching this clip.
Why was it so important the virus not have started in a lab?
Wasn't so important that the virus not. We don't know. We know
it was important to someone in the Biden administration, so much so that the top people at Meta, the top people at Facebook are asking, why are we getting all this pressure to downplay the lab leak theory? And we have an email from June of the same year, June 4th, 2021, saying the same thing. It was certainly important to somebody.
Well, what has that got to do with me?
I'm asking you because you're the expert on the coronavirus.
I love punchy Fauci. It's great.
I'm saying, why was the administration so pushing not to have the lab leak theory as something that was viable?
I can answer that. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
You kept an open mind. Dr. Fauci, open mind.
That is correct.
I'm going to really quickly pause your viewing of this video to ask you to subscribe. I continue to be absolutely blown away by how many of you are doing that every time I ask. So if you haven't yet, please make sure you've clicked that subscribe button.
What happened in those 3 days? Why did Dr. Anderson and Mr. Anderson and Dr. Gary, why did they change their mind in 180 degrees? Because what Christian Anderson says 3 days later, after he said virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory, 3 days later he says the main crackpot theories going around at the moment relate to this virus being somehow engineered, and that is demonstrably false. How did they figure all that out in 3 days, Dr. Fauci?
You can do that.
You still have an open mind.
Well, what they did is that they testified before this committee. What they did, they went back and looked at the sequences and realized that their initial concern was unfounded about that, and it did not look at all like it was manufactured. But as they said in their paper, even though they feel it was more likely,
3 days they figured it out.
That's exactly. You could do that in 3 days. You can scan sequences in a day. You don't need 3 days.
Nicely shutting down Jim Jordan's nonsense there. You can see, I've said it before with these types of moments, the contrast in knowledge between the two people is pretty interesting to observe. And I'll say again, if this was some Democratic left-wing Marxist conspiracy to suppress the truth, why did Biden come into office and go, I want to report on this. I want as much information as possible on how the heck this thing started. And that's part of what they're now looking back at and citing in our increased understanding. And this does real damage. The way that we've seen an all-out assault on the legitimacy of expertise, and then again going to specifically public health officials, the experts in public health, especially exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now MAGA has just completely abandoned their sort of trust in and perceived legitimacy of the public health officials, and that has a real impact on them actually more than anyone else. The Independent reports almost twice as many Republicans than Democrats died of COVID. Study says, jumping down here, nearly twice as many Republicans died from COVID-19 than Democrats did. A new study has found, but in particular, important takeaway is that as NPR reports, Republicans' excess death rate spiked after COVID-19 vaccines arrived, a study says. And that's huge because people's decision to go get vaccinated became so politicized that the gap widened in a major way. We've looked at the particulars in the past after now people had the decision to make on if they went and got vaccinated or not. Again, something that became a politicized decision. So the information they were getting and their stance that was very political based on the information they were getting, based on if they were trusting Jim Jordan and believing that they should not trust the public health official. And Dr. Fauci is this horrible, evil person. That led to a massive number of Republicans dying who didn't have to, as shown by them dying at such higher rates than Democrats, especially after the rollout of the vaccine, when again, then you have this political decision be made based on the vaccine. So really, really severe outcome based on the broader attack on expertise. And I'm bringing that into this conversation because you have to distinguish between, we can have good faith discussions about how our understanding of all different things related to the COVID-19 pandemic has developed. But that can't be justification for you to participate in this, as I've now said multiple times, assault on expertise and assault on these specific experts. Here is another really good moment.
You, sir, did you cite this article at the White House because the NIH director asked you to suppress the lab leak theory?
I did not do that in response to anybody's suggestion to suppress anything. It was in response to a question that someone asked at the podium. And I did not edit any paper as shown in my official testimony. So you said about 4 or 5 things, Congressman, that were just not true.
Well, we have emails to prove it.
Well, you don't.
Thank you, and I yield back.
So the funny part is she goes, we have the emails to prove it. He says, no, you don't. She goes, okay, thank you. And then ends her time. And now I want to get to a breath of fresh air. A couple of Democrats having some good moments in this hearing. You have Robert Garcia here.
Questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Fauci, I am so sorry you just had to sit through that. That was completely irresponsible. Quite frankly, we're hearing, this might be the most insane hearing I've actually attended. I've only been in Congress for a year.
And remember that he's responding here mostly probably to MTG saying that Fauci should be in jail.
Year and a half, but I am so sorry that you are subjected to those level of attacks and insanity. Your quote-unquote so-called science that the gentlewoman is referring to has saved millions of lives in this country and around the world, and I want to thank you for that. I also think it's important to note that, in my opinion, is that you are an American hero and your team has done more to save lives than all 435 members of this body on both sides of the aisle. You guys have worked not just during this pandemic, but over time to save millions of lives in this country and across the world. We lost 1.1 million American lives. 1.1 million American lives, 7 million lives around the world. We were having 9/11-like events, death events daily in this country, losing 4,000, 5,000 people every single day. I was mayor during the time of the pandemic. I remember how painful it was to close businesses, to shut down schools, but how quickly we forget the pain and how scared we were as a country. We were washing our groceries as they were coming in. We were keeping seniors at a distance. The tragedy that was happening in our nursing homes. Thousands of people were dying a day, and you and your team of the best and the brightest scientists in this country and the world were doing everything that you could and working night and day to save more and more of those lives. A lot of my colleagues know that my mom was a healthcare worker during the pandemic. My mom died of COVID. My stepfather died of COVID. I lost both of my parents during the pandemic. So I take this very personally, especially when other members of this body who are tasked to be responsible.
I'll stop it there, but absolutely compelling stuff. And remember, as we looked at in some other hearing, a expert witness testified to, millions of lives, millions upon millions of lives have been saved because of the vaccines. Just specifically with the COVID-19 pandemic, not to mention vaccines generally, goodness. And it is enraging to see people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jim Jordan, who knows so little, but are wielding such incredible power to do so much damage to their own voters. Again, let's have good faith discussions about how our scientific understanding of different things has developed. But how depraved it is that people, for political purposes, because it rouses their base essentially, are leaving this lasting damage that will harm their voters more than anyone else. As I just showed you, twice as many Republicans dying. That didn't have to happen. Thousands and thousands of people died who didn't have to because of the politicization of this tragedy. And that is something that is honestly hard to process and hard not to get very, very upset about. And the next clip, I didn't know I was going to say that. The next clip is so lighthearted compared to what I just said. So prepare for the mood shift. But here's Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Fauci, good to be with you here today. I was not here, but I saw a member of this committee questioned whether or not you represent science and tried to make that in some offensive way. I just want you to know most Americans don't think she represents Congress.
So one of the things I've learned.
So I hear now you double Fauci. So I don't want you to be offended by that.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene is who he's referring to, was saying that, Fauci doesn't represent science as a very general phrase. And Moskowitz is saying, well, interesting she bring that up because we don't think she represents Congress. I think that's an absolutely fair point. And one more brutal moment for MAGA here from Jamie Raskin.
I want to join my colleague from Florida in apologizing to you that some of our colleagues in the United States House of Representatives seem to want to drag your name through the mud. They're treating you, Dr. Fauci, like a convicted felon. Actually, you probably wish they were treating you like a convicted felon. They treat convicted felons with love and admiration. Some of them blindly worship convicted felons.
Right. And I can't and I refuse. I can't subject you to more Marjorie Taylor Greene, so I won't. But that comment about them worshiping a convicted felon, Donald Trump, caused her to spin out completely, just a total train wreck in an interview outside of the hearing room, and she lost her mind again after losing her mind in the hearing room. And just remember, I think about this often. Jamie Raskin, right, with all of his credentials and his profound understanding of a lot of these policy subjects and just his basic dignity, he is not in a literal sense because he probably has more powerful committee placements maybe, but in a general sense, he's as powerful as Marjorie Greene. Marjorie Greene, her sway in the Republican Party might be more powerful than Jamie Raskin. So they get to be the same in that sense. We give them the same amount of institutional respect. Think about that. And she just stumbled her way into this position of power and has absolutely no reason that she should be there. But again, institutionally, they're very similar. And that's a shame and a bad representation of our decisions as a country, as is Trump. So we close, as we so often do, with a message to America at large. Get it together. Okay, we can do it, but we got to do it quick. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my mind. Let me know what you thought of all that in the comments.